Still More Stories from Grandma's Attic by Arleta Richardson, illustrated by Dora. Chapter 3. High Society. I always thought of Grandma's folks as country people, warm and cheerful. The old home the family lived in for years was large, but I never thought of Grandma's family as rich. Not until one day at school when I was describing the old farm home to my class. "You must have had some pretty rich ancestors," my teacher commented. As soon as I got home that day, I asked Grandma, "Were your folks wealthy?" "Come to think of it, they were in some ways," Grandma answered, "but probably not the way your teacher meant."
"What other way is there? Rich means a lot of money, doesn't it?"
"Not always," Grandma replied. "Sometimes it means other things we hardly ever think of. I learned about some of them when I was your age." I settled down at the table to hear Grandma's story as she sat crocheting. "Ma was busy baking bread when I came home from school one day. I could smell baked beans in the oven, and I knew we were having a favorite supper this evening."
That smells good, Ma. How long before we eat?"
"Oh, the usual time, I expect," Ma replied. "Sometime between the hour you're so hungry you can't stand it and the hour you starve to death." I laughed at that because it seemed as though we were always between those 2 hours. I watched Ma knead the bread. Her sleeves were rolled up above her elbows and little wisps of hair were coming out around her face.
"We have a pretty hard life, don't we, Ma?"
She straightened up and looked at me with amazement. "Now why would you say a thing like that?"
"Well, Sarah Jane's cousin Laura is visiting from the city, and she says we do. Not just us Odells,"
I hastened to add.
"but everyone who lives out here in the country. She says she doesn't know how we live without servants to do the work."
Ma went back to her kneading.
"I can tell her if she's really interested." That's what Sarah Jane's Ma told her, too. But Laura says she thinks we must be terribly unhappy. Do you suppose we should be feeling bad and we just don't know it?
"That's a possibility," Ma admitted, "but I'd just as soon not find out." She deftly separated the dough and formed a panful of rolls. Then she set them on the back of the stove to rise.
"I don't know what I'd do with a servant if I had one." "She could do the cooking and baking."
"I'll take care of my own cooking and baking, thank you," Ma replied. "That way I always know what I'm eating. Besides, I enjoy it."
"She could do the dishes. You don't always enjoy those."
"I have a perfectly good daughter who needs to know how to do dishes," Ma said. "How are you ever going to know how to run your own home when you grow up if you never help someone else do it?"
"With a lot of servants,"
I thought to myself, but I wouldn't say that to Ma. I was convinced that she didn't know what she was missing. As we sat around the supper table that night, my mind was still on the subject.
"Pa, would you like to have a servant?"
"A what?"
"A servant, someone to do your work for you."
"I don't mind having a hired hand at harvest time, but I don't want someone doing my work," Pa replied. "What would I do?"
Reuben was quick to offer some suggestions. "You could spend some time fishing and some time just sitting around the house."
"Not my house, you couldn't," Ma put in quickly. "I have enough to do without working around useless bodies. Now, if you were old and feeble, I'd let you sit by the stove and chuck a piece of wood in now and then. But you're not, thank the Lord." No one seemed to agree with me, so I didn't say anything more. I thought a lot about it, though, until an unusual happening straightened out my thinking. A few days before school was out, Sarah Jane met me at the end of our lane.
"Mabel, have I got some news for you. You'll never believe it." "What? What is it?"
Sarah Jane was jumping up and down.
"You just won't believe it." "Oh, for goodness sake, Sarah Jane, are you going to tell me or not?" "Of course I'm going to tell you. Just give me a chance." "My cousin Laura has asked me to come to the city for a week as soon as school is out. She wants you to come too. My ma is going to ask your folks tonight. What do you think of that?"
Sarah Jane was right. I didn't believe her. I had never been away from home that long in my life. The thought of visiting the city took my breath away.
"Do you think your folks will let you go?"
Sarah Jane was saying.
"Oh, I hope so. I'll be good for the rest of my life if they will." "I don't think I'd mention that if I were you. Parents have a way of thinking you ought to be good without getting paid for it.
I nodded in agreement, and we walked on to school. All that day, I wondered if Ma and Pa would say yes. That evening, when Sarah Jane's mother came over, I was sure the answer would be no. But it wasn't. If Laura's parents really wanted 2 house guests, I could go. The next few days were a flurry of getting ready.
I'll only need to take my very best summer dresses, Ma, I told her, and my good shoes. What do you plan to wear to play in? She asked me. You can't run around outside in your good clothes. I don't think you run around outside in this city, I replied. I think you just dress up and look pretty.
That could get old in a hurry. You'd better take a few things just in case. My box was packed and repacked several times before the Monday arrived to leave. If you don't stand still, Ma warned me that morning, I won't have your hair combed by the time the Clarks get here. You don't want to keep them waiting, do you? I didn't, nor did I want to wait myself. So I stood as still as possible while Ma finished getting me ready. I couldn't eat any breakfast, but Ma insisted that I drink the hot cocoa. Finally, Sarah Jane and her folks arrived, and we were on our way to the city.
Can you imagine having someone do everything for you? I said to Sarah Jane. We'll be real ladies, won't we? Oh yes, I don't think I'll ever want to come back home. I won't make a bed or do a dish or dust a chair all the time we're here. Laura's mama even has a seamstress to do her mending. Her mama? I inquired. That's what Laura calls her. It's more stylish, you know. She calls her Pa Papa, too.
I couldn't imagine acting stylish when I returned home, not with Roy and Reuben around. But I would remember how they lived in the city. Maybe when I had a home of my own. We arrived at our destination before dusk. As we climbed down from the buggy, I regarded the big house with awe.
It has 3 whole floors. Do they live on all of them? Certainly, Sarah Jane assured me. We'll sleep on the top one. There's a library and a music room, too, and a big yard to play in. I've never stayed here before, but I visited once with my folks.
We were ushered into a large hallway, and Laura came to meet us. "Oh, good," she exclaimed. "You're here in time for dinner. Come on in." I opened my mouth to say that we had eaten dinner at noon, but then closed it again. Something told me that the less I said, the better off I'd be. But when we were seated in a big dining room lighted with gas lamps, I could no longer contain my curiosity.
"Where does Laura's mama fix her meals?"
I whispered to Sarah Jane.
"She doesn't. The cook fixes them." "But where?" "In the kitchen, of course," Sarah Jane said. "It's downstairs." "In the cellar?" I squeaked,
and then blushed when everyone looked at me.
"It's not called the cellar," Sarah Jane explained. "It's the lower floor. We'll see it tomorrow."
We were taken to our room very early. Once we crawled into the strange bed, I lay for a long time looking at the ceiling.
"Sarah Jane," I said at last, "when do they eat supper here?" "We just finished eating it a little while ago. Don't you remember?" "But Laura called that dinner. At home we eat dinner at noon." "Oh, well, they call supper dinner, and they call dinner luncheon," she explained. "You get the same stuff to eat, though."
That really didn't make good sense to me, but I decided if I was going to grow up to be a society lady, I'd better learn some of the finer points. I fell asleep thinking about eating in Ma's warm kitchen with the good smells of food cooking and wood burning. The following morning, as we watched Sarah Jane's folks drive off toward home, my heart sank. I almost wished I were going too. The feeling only lasted a few moments, though, for Laura soon hurried us off to shop in the big stores. "Don't lag behind me, girls," she warned, "or you'll get lost. You may never find the front door again."
"I think that might be the truth," Sarah Jane said. "We'd better keep an eye on her."
We didn't lose Laura, but we didn't see much that was in the store either. She moved through the many aisles as if she were running a race. We were both glad to be back at the house, protected by the big spiked fence that surrounded it.
"This house doesn't really look lived in, does it?" I asked as we sat on the steps. "I guess it isn't, not as much as ours."
Sarah Jane admitted.
Laura's out a lot and her ma goes calling every day. Her papa works in a big office, so he never comes home except to eat at night and sleep. Why don't we go out to the barn? I suggested. Animals would remind us of home.
That's not a barn, Sarah Jane sighed. It's a carriage house.
All it has is horses and buggies.
I was stunned.
No cows? No chickens? Where do they get their milk and eggs? Buy 'em. They buy everything or else have someone else make it for them. I always thought that would be sort of nice, but there's something nice about a big barn with cows bumping around in it.
I heartily agreed with her. Gloom settled over us as we thought about the days ahead. We did have nice times, though. Laura and her folks did their best to make us happy. Nevertheless, when the Clarks' buggy came into sight at the end of our visit, both Sarah Jane and I were ready to start for home. I could hardly wait for the buggy to drive up our lane.
"Oh, Ma!"
I cried when I finally burst into our kitchen.
"Are you glad I'm back?"
Ma grabbed me and gave me a big hug.
"I should say I am. It's been too quiet around here with no one helping me."
"Did you happen to bring a servant back with you?" I shook my head.
"We're not hard up at all, Ma. They don't have any food or milk or anything unless they buy it. We have it right here free. And they never get to eat in the kitchen or sit by the cook stove or walk in the woods. I'd rather be right here with you and Pa and the boys."
"Good," Ma said. "I was hoping you'd feel that way.
People live all different kinds of lives, but this is where God has placed us, and I'm glad you're happy with it. You can tell us all about your visit at supper time." "Supper will taste good tonight,"
I said as I started toward my room.
"I haven't had one since I left home."
End of chapter 3.